Is it going? Well, welcome everyone, and good evening to the third chapter of the book of Zephaniah. It would be probably helpful for you to have your Bibles open if you've got them in whatever way you can do, just because we're going to look through a text, and I guess I just wanted to. One of the interesting things about looking at this text has been as I've taken out other translations, what I've noticed with this section that I've got is how different they are. So when I'm reading my text to you, your text may well seem different, and I find that in some ways a helpful reminder that what we're reading is a translation from another language and from an ancient language. And so I think we really need God's help to see and to hear clearly what is being said to us. So I'm going to briefly pray, and then I'm going to read you this text. Father, we thank you for the boldness of the prophet Zephaniah. We thank you for his conviction to speak the truth in love. And we pray that as we read these words today, that we might hear you speak, that you might stir our hearts to love and good works, and that you might encourage us to trust you, to seek you, and to live in a way that is pleasing to you. And we ask this all for God's glory and in the wonderful name of Yeshua, our Messiah. Amen. Okay, so tonight we're going to look at Zephaniah, the last chapter of Zephaniah. That's what we're in. Fiona is going to take from verse 14 to 20, which is which I don't think I'm spoiling the end of the story if I say that that's the glorious part of the text. I don't think that's going to surprise any of you. So we are going to today look at verse 1 down to the end of verse 13. So let me read this to you. Woe to the city of oppressors, rebellious and defiled. She obeys no one. She accepts no correction. She does not trust in the Lord. She does not draw near to her God. Her officials are roaring lions. Her rulers are evening wolves who leave nothing for the morning. Her prophets are arrogant. They are treacherous men. Her priests profane the sanctuary and do violence to the law. The Lord within her is righteous. He does no wrong. Morning by morning, he dispenses his justice, and every new day he does not fail. Yet the unrighteous know no shame. I've cut off nations, their strongholds are demolished. I have left their streets deserted, with no one passing through. Their cities are destroyed, no one will be left, no one at all. I said to the city, surely you will fear me and accept correction. Then your dwelling would not be cut off, nor all my punishments come upon you. But they were still eager to act corruptly in all they did. Therefore, wait confidently for me, declares the Lord, for the day I will stand up to testify. I have decided to assemble the nations, to gather the kingdoms, and to pour out my wrath on them, all my fierce anger. The whole world will be consumed by the fire of my jealous anger. Then I will purify the lips of the people, that all of them may call on the name of the Lord and serve him shoulder to shoulder. From beyond the rivers of Cush, my worshippers, my scattered people will bring me offerings. On that day, you will not be put to shame for all the wrongs you have done to me, because I will remove from this city those who rejoice in their pride. Never again will you be haughty on my holy hill, but I will leave within you the meek and the humble, who trust in the name of the Lord, the remnant of Israel, will do no wrong. They will speak no lies, nor will deceit be found in their mouths. They will eat and lie down, and no one will make them afraid. Wow. This text is certainly a game of two halves. We can certainly, even from that reading, I think, see that judgment and hope, judgment and transformation, judgment and restoration are not aliens. They're not separate. They're intrinsic. They're inseparable. If you remember the end of chapter 2, verse 13 says, he will stretch out his hand against the north and destroy Assyria, leaving Nineveh utterly desolate and as dry as the desert. And then in what I think there's this beautiful picture of, it says about the desert owl, and the screech owl will roost on the columns. And if you know anything about the history of Nineveh, the capital of Assyria, it's a pretty dramatic place, pretty architecturally significant sort of place. So these desert owls perching on the columns in this abandoned city is a pretty powerful picture of decimation. So when in verse 1 of chapter 3, it says, woe to the city of oppressors, rebellious and defiled. Who do you think Zephaniah is talking about? I mean, when you think of Israel's oppressors, if you think of the rebels and the defiled ones, aren't you likely to think of Assyria? Or even Babylon, or maybe the Ninevites, the Moabites, the Edomites, the Ammonites, any of the ites, but not necessarily the Israelites. Woe to the city of oppressors, rebellious and defiled. She obeys no one, she accepts no correction. She does not trust in the Lord. She does not draw near to her God. Zephaniah is using the standard rhetorical technique of drawing us in to what appears to be judgment observed, and then suddenly we realize that the judgment is on us. So you see exactly the same thing in Amos. In the book of Amos, it's exactly the same. There's plenty of other examples of it. So we're woe to the city. In some of the translations I read in this text, you'll see the word Jerusalem actually inserted into the English. You may have it in your English translation, but it's not in any part of this section that we looked at. It's inserted to help the reader understand what city is being talked about, maybe because it seems so unlikely. But Zephaniah's purpose is that when you get to 3:14, I promise Fiona, I will not go any further than this. Sing, O daughter of Zion, shout aloud, O Israel. That's supposed to be, that's part of the rhetorical purpose of the writer, to make that the highlight. So if you've got Jerusalem in there, just so you know, it's an insertion. So why does it matter that God's city is rebellious and defiled? Well, Jesus has told us, hasn't he, repeatedly, about the city on the top of the hill that cannot hide. That is supposed to be a light to those that surround it. And in Deuteronomy, as I'm frequently saying, that God chose Israel to be a witness to the nations that surrounded it. In verse 6 of chapter 4 in Deuteronomy, observe that you're supposed to be observed so that your wisdom and understanding will be revealed to the nations who will hear about the decrees. And surely this is a great nation. What other nations has a God so near to them? And especially when they pray to him. And what other nation is so great as to have such righteous decrees and laws? So God's purpose for Israel was to put his wisdom and his glory on display. And so when God's chosen people are exactly the opposite of what they should be, not living according to their creator's pattern, not being a light to the Gentiles, but in fact suppressing the truth instead of submitting to it, running away from God in rebellion instead of returning to him in repentance, using the freedoms that God has given to his people instead of to live a life of delight that shines like a star in the dark night. God's people are rebellious and defiled. She obeys no one and accepts no correction. I don't know if you remember in Ezekiel, God finds Israel. There's a section. God finds Israel on a hill, like an abandoned baby, and it's in Ezekiel 16. He says, "I passed by and saw you kicking about in your blood as you lay there." And he says, "I said to you, live, and I made you grow." And then the rest of 16 is this beautiful story of how God loved Israel into this beauty. And then if you read on in that story, you'll see that the exact same pattern. It paints in really what this looks like for Israel to obey, to obey no one and seek no correction. Doesn't mean it means to live as if they've got no master, no husband, no leader, no father. And it reveals that there's no trust in the Lord. There's no trust in him. So right off the bat, we need to just reflect on how the way we, he calls us, be holy, he says, as I am holy, whether it's in Leviticus or the epistle of Peter, to Peter. Never underestimate the significance of obedience in the life of a disciple of Jesus. Because your lack of obedience demonstrates your lack of trust. I'm teaching through Romans at the moment, and I'm very well aware that the law is that you don't get, that we're made righteous by faith. The righteousness that's been revealed from God, that is by faith from first to last. But God has chosen to put us on display to the world. It's part of our witness, and we need to remember that. She does not trust in the Lord. She does not draw near to her God. That's the next thing. It's one thing not to trust him. It's another thing not to take that situation and then turn to him in prayer. And remember that kind of, so this can't be any other people, and it can't be any other city. It can't be any other people than Israel, any other city than but Jerusalem. So that's the big picture painted for us in just a few verses. Now look at her officials are roaring lions. Her rulers are evening wolves who leave nothing for the morning. So officials and rulers could be translated as princes and judges. It's the sort of civil leaders and the kings. I don't really fancy having a king who's a roaring lion. Do you? You know, it's just I don't and go into the throne room and be confronted by a roaring lion. This is not a C.S. Lewis analogy. This is a real lion. The rulers are evening wolves who leave nothing for the morning. In another translation, it says they're wolves of the evening who did not eat in the morning. It's the picture of they're ravenous wolves. I watched a nature program the other day with a pack of hyenas chasing zebra in the plains, and there were thousands of these zebras, and this hyena was trotting along with the head of a zebra and just the spine sticking out the bottom of the head, and he was covered in blood. That's the picture of what these officials, that's how they're living. They certainly are not the good shepherds of Ezekiel chapter 34. In Ezekiel 34, and we don't have time to look at it, but you'll see in Ezekiel 34, you'll see the shepherds. This is not a surprise to God, and you'll see that the judgment that falls on those shepherds as you read through that chapter. Her prophets are arrogant, they are treacherous men. I found that really tragic. You know, what's the job of the prophet? He's to speak for God to God's people. These prophets are arrogant and treacherous, unprincipled, that they're immoral, unpredictable. They're treacherous has always this idea of betrayal and deception underneath it. So God's people are rebellious and defiled, and the prophets are arrogant and treacherous. Things do not appear to be going very well, do they? Let's move on. Priests profane the sanctuary and do violence to the law. Well, that doesn't really need much in the way of exposition, other than to say, you know, profane. I think violence to the law. The law had come to give God's people the opportunity to live in a way that reflected the character of God that they had lost. And to profane the sanctuary, profane is just the opposite of holy. So it's the very opposite of what they're supposed to be. Now, given what we've seen already, I was very surprised by verse 5. Do you see what verse 5 says? I mean, where is the Lord? Like, according to Psalm 11, which was one of the first ones I read, he's in his temple on his throne. Verse 5 tells us that the Lord is within her. The Lord within her is righteous. He does no wrong. Morning by morning, he dispenses his justice. Every new day, he does not fail, yet the unrighteous know no shame. The city might not listen. They might not accept discipline. They might not trust God or draw near to him. But God was always speaking. He was constantly making his decisions known. And he was always available to his people. And he was totally trustworthy. He was totally righteous. It just reminds me of this phrase, all day long I hold out my hands to an obstinate people. All day long I hold up my hands to Simon and call to him. What's God's response to sin, rebellion, and to violence? To dispense justice, to speak righteousness. It just reminded me about this verse about love in action in Romans 12. Hate what is evil, cling to what is good. Or in Philippians, children of God, live like children of God, who in a warped and crooked generation shine like stars in the sky. Morning by morning, continuously, God's character doesn't change because of the behavior of his people. And we're called to be like him. Today I spoke to a Jewish guy called Sam. I think I just said to him, God bless you, the Messiah has died for you, something like that. And we got into a conversation, and I was fighting for my theological life, to be honest with you. He had one standard, well-rehearsed Jewish objection to Jesus after another. And it's in those situations, it's tempting to get frustrated. And that must happen to us. It's not just with me in that situation. See God's response. He stays in the city. He continues to teach in righteousness and in justice. And it says he does not fail. So often we're disheartened by the fact that the unrighteous know no shame. We feel that we have somehow failed in one way or another, or we should have done this or could have done this or whatever else. But see this as just an encouragement to us that even when God himself was there in the temple speaking, whether you think about Jesus in the temple speaking or in this text here described, the unrighteous know no shame. Now this next bit is a kind of the language is an accommodation to us so that we can understand God's feelings. He says, I've cut off the nations, their strongholds are demolished. I've left their streets deserted with no one passing through. Their cities are destroyed. No one will be left, none at all. I say to the city, surely you will fear me and accept correction. Then your dwelling would not be cut off, nor all my punishments come upon you. He's drawing back, hopefully, if God can be hopeful in that sense, He's drawing back and saying, look, look at the world. I mean, this judgment we're looking at Judgment Day, a judgment that we seem to be hurtling towards with great speed. But nonetheless, this hasn't yet happened. He's going to cut off all the nations and destroy their strongholds. The idea here, you can see, is basically the end of all human hope. The streets deserted, no one passing through, cities destroyed, no one left, no one at all. The cities destroyed and deserted reminds me of what the city of London was like during lockdown. These towering, incredible buildings, once full of thousands of people, deserted. All the busy bars, everything closed, nothing, just desolate. The noisy sound of pigeons flapping their wings. That's about the noisiest thing you could hear. But this is not a coronavirus lockdown. This lockdown is permanent. It's emphatic. And again, it was a warning to me as I was reading it, but when I was thinking about the disciples looking to Herod's temple and that building and thinking how great and wonderful it was, and Jesus's reminder that there is a greater spiritual truth for us to see in this text. So despite all this judgment, despite all the evidence, verse 7 says, surely they will fear me and accept correction so that judgment and punishment does not fall on them. But no, in the end of verse 7, they were still eager to act corruptly in all they did. What would have happened if Jerusalem had accepted the correction? Her place of refuge, her place of refuge would not have been destroyed, and all the punishments would not have come onto her. And so once again, we're at a loss as to how God's plan is going to pan out. So verse 8, he says, therefore wait confidently for me. This is the word of the Lord. In a different translation, I've got, for the day I rise to the prey. For it is my decision to gather the nations and to assemble the kingdoms, to pour out on them my indignation and all my flaming anger. For in the fire of my jealousy, all the earth will be eaten up. So remember that this final description of the failure of Judah and Jerusalem is the tailpiece on the back of all the nations that you had looked at from the beginning of chapter 2, verse 4. I've decided to assemble the nations, to gather the kingdoms, to pour out my wrath on them, my fierce anger, and the whole world will be consumed by the fire of my jealous anger. I don't know how Fiona seems to get away with. It seems like I always get the bit where it says, I had the bit before where I had to tell you all that at the end of chapter 1, in the fire of his jealousy, the whole world will be consumed, for he will make a sudden end to all those who live on the earth. I know how Zephaniah feels. The whole world will be consumed by the fire of my jealous anger. I suppose I do want to say something about his jealous anger, because it is so natural to translate that like a jealous human husband getting angry, or anger and jealousy are vile emotions corrupted in the human flesh. but they are pure in his anger is his settled determination to destroy sin. And his jealousy is because he loves you and wants you as his bride. It's this pure love of the Father and his settled anger against sin that is driving this consummate judgment. Well, as they say, that's the bad news. I think we desperately need some good news now, don't we? We haven't got the choice here of which you want first, the good news or the bad news. But here comes the good news. So I'm going to give you a structure to see, and then I'm going to read it to you and see if you can see it. So in verse 9, you're going to see Babel reversed. You know the Babel thing? Tower of Babel? You're going to see that reversed. Then by the time we get to verse 11, we're going to see this city that just seemed like an absolute lost cause. Nothing's going to happen. No way, no how. We're going to see that transformed. And then by the time we get to verse 13, we're going to see Eden restored. As these pictures of pasture, rest, and fearlessness. So we're going to go Babel reversed, Jerusalem renewed, Eden restored. That sounds like 3 pieces of excellent good news. And from a personal point of view, I suppose it's probably not pushing it too much to think about this being he who begins a good work in you will see it through to completion. Okay. Then I will purify the lips of the peoples, that all of them may call on the name of the Lord and serve him from shoulder to shoulder. From beyond the rivers of Cush, my worshippers, my scattered people, will bring me offerings. This is lovely, isn't it? Do you remember, do you remember the guy in the boat who said to Jesus, "Get away from me, I'm a man of impure lips. Do you remember that? And do you remember Isaiah as well? Isaiah wants to go and be a missionary, and God's solution to the problem is but his lips, he's a man of unclean lips again. So God's solution is to take a coal from this holy fire and to do exactly this thing of purifying his lips. And the reason I say that this, I want you to see Babel being reversed here, is because look at this thing. He says that he's purifying the lips of the peoples, that all of them may call on the name of the Lord. In effect, you remember that in Babel, that God's concern was that because they all spoke the same lips, they would be able to do anything. They become completely independent. And as we all know, when we become completely independent from God, it's a disaster. To use the Craig, the judge from Strictly Come Dancing, it's a disaster, darling. All of them will call on the name of the Lord and serve shoulder to shoulder. And look, from beyond the rivers of Cush, my worshippers, my scattered people will bring me offerings. It is a picture. It's again this wonderful picture of every tongue, tribe, and nation gathering to worship the God of Israel. A people that were once separated by different languages because of their rebellion and sin. Their lips are now pure. They speak the same language. They call on the same God, and they stand shoulder to shoulder in the gospel. And in God's wonderful wisdom is that in order for us to get to this point, we've got to go through the horrific bad news of those first sections of judgment, of chapter 2 to where we are now. Okay, so Babel's reversed. On that day, you will not be put to shame for all the wrongs you have done to me. That's lovely, isn't it? You will not be put to shame for all the wrongs you've done to me. That is a God of humility. That is a God of love revealing himself in that phrase. Because I will remove from this city those who rejoice in their pride. Never again will you be haughty on my holy hill. And now you're going to hear Jesus speaking out of Zephaniah, if ever I heard it. But I will leave within you the meek and the humble who trust in the name of the Lord. You know, the blessed are you, blessed are the, this is the Sermon on the Mount. This is the remnant that was described in chapter 2 with Fiona, chapter 2, verse 7. The remnant are the meek and the humble who trust in the name of the Lord. And it's no coincidence that in chapter 3 at the beginning, she does not trust in the Lord. But our God has been through Jerusalem with a lamp, if you remember from chapter 1. And the only people that remain now in Jerusalem are those that trust him. The remnant of Israel will do no wrong. They will speak no lies, nor will deceit be found in their mouth. They will eat and lie down. No one will make them afraid. Verse 13 is what I want to call Eden restored. Because Israel will do no wrong. They will finally be what God had always intended them to be. They'll no longer be roaring lions, that the officials will no longer be roaring lions or evening wolves. The prophets will no longer be arrogant or treacherous. The priests will no longer do violence to the law or profane the sanctuary. No. They will speak no lies. No deceit will be found in their mouths. They will eat and lie down, and no one will make them afraid. This little section, 3 to 9, is a section all about God's glorious grace to people, to objects of his wrath. That's each one of us. If you look at verse 9, I will purify the lips. Verse 11, I will remove from this city. Verse 12, I will leave within the city. It reminds me, you know, this is like the new Exodus that's described in Isaiah 52. And when I go back to thinking about Exodus, I don't know if you remember in Exodus 6, before the Passover, I think there are like 7 I wills. I'll bring you out. I'll break the yoke of slavery. I'll bring you into the land. I will, I will, I will. No deceit will be in their mouths. That's what I want to finish on before Fiona sends me a little note in the chat to say I've run out of time. When you talk to Jewish people about the gospel, and as I've been doing today, telling them that the Messiah has died for them, that he's risen from the grave, and that he's provided an eternal Yom Kippur for them, what I want to do is go to Isaiah 52 and 53. Because it is there that we see this man on whom there was no deceit on his lips. This new Exodus, this new restoration is made possible by the one who spoke no lies, by the one in whom no deceit was found. And he is the only one who can usher in this time where God's people can eat and lie down, and when nobody will make them afraid. Isaiah has promised this to us early in his letter. In chapter 11, where a shoot will come from the stump of Jesse, his roots, a branch will bear fruit. Spirit of the Lord will rest on him. He'll not judge as he sees with his eyes or decide, but he'll judge in righteousness, the very thing that we've seen in this text. The wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, the calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a child will lead them. The cow will feed with the bear, the young will lie down together, the lion will eat straw like an ox. The infant will play near the hole of the cobra, the young child put his hand in the viper's nest. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. Zephaniah has told us, Zephaniah is kind of giving us a nice little skeleton, a structure, a framework, which we can sew or attach lots of detail from all the other prophets to give us this great hope of our final destination. And as we were talking before we started, when you look at the world and all the confusing news and messages and information that we're constantly bombarded with, this promise of a new creation, of the undoing of the curse of Babel, of the restoration of his people in order that they might trust in him, draw near to him, so that they can lie down and not feel afraid. To have that sense of peace gives us great hope. It gives us great hope. And that's before we even get to Fiona's nice bit from imagine what next week is going to be like. This is a pretty good start, but next week is fireworks. You know, he's able to do immeasurably more than we can ask or imagine. And Fiona's 14 to 20 is almost like a Paulian monologue of delight and doxology. And so I'm really looking forward to what that will, how we'll go through that next week. Yeah, I think, and just in terms of application, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. My goodness, how valuable Proverbs 3 turns out to be. And never forget that the way you live matters to God, because he wants to put his glory on display through your lives. And this week, he will give you opportunities to make decisions that will bring glory to his name. And it's my prayer that you and I together will make those good decisions, and that we'll be that light on the hill that brings a testimony to the glory of his name. I think that's about all I want to say this evening. So Fiona, you can stop the recording. Let's hope she hasn't gone off to make a cup of tea.